Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good.
Okay, so it's the first day of June, 2020.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, it's been a rough ride lately. Makes it a little bit challenging for us positive peace folks these days. I know that there are people out there right now, their intention is to create a civil war, is to accelerate the polarization. And I believe there are many people who don't want that, but they don't know what to do. How do we activate like a positive counteroffensive against that, all that negativity? There is a school of thought of, as Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high. Right now, that doesn't seem like it's enough. And I don't know what is in those people's hearts, in particular in those men's hearts, that they want to incite violence. What's in it for them? And how does that get them anywhere near the world that they want to live in? A world that is safe. I mean, why would you want to live in a world that is hostile and that you have to armor up
Yeah.
and that you feel like you need to carry weapons all the time? Can you imagine living with that much cortisol in your system, in your body, that much stress to create an environment, to perpetuate a climate where you're in that heightened adrenaline cortisol state?
Yeah.
It's so damaging to your body. It damages your cognition. It kills your empathy. I don't know where you find joy or happiness in that path.
I had a conversation decades ago now with head of security for a dictator in a third world country.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just suggesting to him that one's quality of life would be so much higher by creating an environment where your people loved you.
And
um, and so you didn't have to walk around, perpetually in fear of being
mm-hmm.
assassinated or assaulted or whatever. Once people would love them so much more if they didn't have to walk around in the same kind of fear from the secret police and so on. And you can see the dysfunctionality of the pattern, but when people are trapped in it, it's not easy to see their way out, I guess. So there's a little bit of game theory here, isn't there, in terms of, you asked what's the motivation?
Mm-hmm.
And we can see from the data and work of people like Bruce Bueno de Mesquita and so on, what some of the motivations are, and one of the recurring things that's really relevant to our work as we work to unify people and
Yeah.
connect people into ever larger groups and communities and so on. One of the issues for any player at any scale is that when you scale up, you're then a smaller fish in a bigger pond. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're thinking in terms of first order power dynamics, you'd rather be a bigger fish in a smaller pond. And the problem is that people don't think about the second order and the third order of power dynamics. They just think about the first order.
Mm-hmm.
And typically they're coming from being stuck in a power scarce environment and therefore thinking, if I could just get more power, then my life would be
Mm-hmm.
happier. Yeah. Forgetting, of course, that power is also comes in a cycle, and the moment you have it, you're looking for the best places to use it. And if you can't find them, power becomes quite toxic.
In the US, we tend to have a winner take all mentality, this mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a matter of degree. And so if you say we want people winners in terms of we want them to be excellent, we want them to be best in class, you say, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with wanting to have mastery, to be really great at something. And yet we seem to have turned it, made it toxic and turned it into like, if in order for me to be good or to be great at something, that means I need to vanquish everyone. And we know from our game design studies in terms of game player archetypes, the dominators, right? The dominator players tend to be sociopathic. They not only do they want to win, they want to vanquish everyone. They just want to demolish everyone else. It's that zero sum game mentality. Like I can only really win if I just crush you, as opposed to many of us can win because many of us can have mastery.
Yeah, the I can only win if somebody else is losing, and then the more toxic version of that, where I not only need somebody to lose, I need this whole audience of people to see me making that person lose and to see me stomping on their heads. And that's where, yeah, you'd see deep sociopathy.
Carol Dweck at Stanford talks about growth versus a fixed mindset. And a fixed mindset says, well, I'm just the way I am, or things are just the way they are and they're unchangeable. That certainly at the individual level, that can be a very limiting belief, a very limiting story that you can tell yourself, versus one of growth, which is I can learn. And that actually acknowledges the reality of neuroplasticity, the ability of us to rewire our brains. And coming from a community, ethnic minority in the United States, where we've not had agency because of the system. I mean, there are people who are down not through any fault of their own, but because of the system, the rules of the game limit their ability to move forward. And yet, and still, even in that small space, to have some level of agency of how you're going to design your life, even within that constraint, because quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you still have constraints. We're humans in human bodies. We're all going to die. We have tragedy, disease, suffering. No one's immune to it, right? If anyone says, why me, you might flip it around and say, why not me? Life has suffering, but it's how we deal with it. It's how we respond to it. That makes a difference in terms of whether we have any kind of inner peace. So when we're talking about peace externally in the world, the first place to start is with yourself. And how do you operate in the world? What is your mindset? What are the stories that you tell yourself about what's possible and what's not? We have an infinite capacity to be kind and loving to other people. And the first person we need to start with is ourselves. If we can love ourselves and be compassionate and empathetic with ourselves, that can radiate out. It's hard to give what you don't have. How could we foster more of that? The positive self-care, so you can show up to be your best. You can show up to be kind and generous and abundant to others because you have that within you.
We as humans, our superpower is cooperating. Our superpower is coordinating our action with each other. And so the moment you can just include the word together, a whole bunch of things change. And so whenever you've got togetherness built into a strategy, then you've got it. And you can see it again in communities all around the world where it's like, if I had to go through this adversity alone, that would be really hard. But if we collectively go through this adversity together, that can actually strengthen our social bonds with each other. It can strengthen our sense of meaning and purpose. It can strengthen our sense of accomplishment. And we can be happy in the midst of a horrible circumstance because we can look at each other and go, we're doing this together. We coordinate our behavior in the face of adversity and step into it together. We can, there's one big clue there in our neuroscience.
I think about the oral history in our family. My father was the keeper of all those family stories, and on my father's side were Yaqui. It's a Native American tribe in Sonora, Arizona area, and they were one of the few tribes that were not conquered by the Europeans. So everybody else got, but the Yaquis said no, and they fought for hundreds of years, even into the 20th century, in terms of their lands and so on. And so part of my origin story is, I'm descended from warriors. We know how to survive and fight. And my dad would tell stories about the Depression and about how in, massive unemployment and so on. And my grandfather had a job, and he had a Model T, and apparently he had a shotgun, and he had his dog. And when he would get paid, he would go and buy these huge 50-pound sacks of rice and beans and crates of eggs, and he would go and hunt some jackrabbits and so on. And he would go to the people in the neighborhood and he would give them their ration of food. He would say, okay, here's some beans, here's some rice, here's some eggs, and here's a rabbit, here's some meat. And that's just what they did. He wasn't looking for payment, he wasn't looking for anything. It was just I have something I can share it with you so we can all get through this together. And I remember those stories very deeply, and my dad would tell other stories of other family members doing that sort of cooperative um, sharing without, and there wasn't any accounting or anyone keeping a ledger of, so and so owes so and so down to the penny or anything like that. It wasn't transactional, but it was very much like that's what you do. We take care of each other. We take care of each other as long as we need to, and uh, and that's how we will get through all of this in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of mass unemployment, and being in a community that's not privileged, that's going to bear the brunt of it. Um, we will figure this out day by day and just keep walking through until it passes.
The kind of cultures that we've both had the privilege of living in, where people value social fabric and
Yeah.
value um, each other and the relationship with each other
Mm-hmm.
more than material stuff. Um, Certainly for me, growing up in New Guinea, where the notion of private property had never occurred to almost all of the traditional cultures in New Guinea, at least at that time in the 60s and 70s. For the first year or so while we're culturally adapting, people would feel like, oh, somebody stole my axe or my machete or whatever, and somebody have to take them aside and go, there is no stealing here. Somebody needed your machete and your axe, and then when you need it, you just go get either the one that they borrowed from you back, or you go borrow one from somebody else. And yeah, I'm so grateful that I got to experience that vividly as a child, and realize there are other very good ways to be human. And it's more about your operating system and setting expectations and helping to coordinate getting those assets and resources where they are needed, when they are needed, and so on. You promised us to talk about lessons you learned from venture capital, was one of the topics we were going to revisit,
Mm.
including some very valuable lessons that I learned from you.
So in tight knit communities, there is this awareness of keeping the money circulating within that community, right? So, and you see that in ethnic communities where they say, okay, I'm going to keep my business with people who are like me, like Jewish communities, Hispanic communities, there are a variety of communities, like, what's good for the community. And so when we were last talking about your experience with Pact Fund, and one of the things that we've accidentally done in the venture capital uh, community in terms of the kinds of investments we've done over the last, especially the last 15, 20 years, is we have unintentionally promoted capital flight out of communities.
Mm.
So when you look at the Amazons of the world, where all the money's going to Seattle and to Jeff Bezos, rather than staying in with local retailers, local businesses. And those local businesses are like my grandparents and my parents, and they say like, okay, we're taking the money in the community, but we're reinvesting it in different ways, either by hiring people, you know, the store clerk, the stock checker, the manager, whoever, but also investing in the soccer league, the baseball team, the Girl Scouts. All that is a way of reinvesting as well. And when we put our money into local businesses, they then, with their profits, can do micro CSR, right? They can do um, sustainable development. They can be a micro charity. They can be a micro philanthropist. They have the ability to do all those things in community because they're part of the community. And so when you look at capitalism at that scale, it can be very supportive. It can be very interdependent, and it strengthens social fabric. And this is where money becomes the token of showing how we support each other. We support each other's endeavors. We support each other's dreams. We support each other to have a sustainable life. What the internet has shown, and certainly all the various platforms, is that there is plenty of room for people to shine. If you look at all the YouTube influencers
Well,
and who have an audience, I mean, there are only 7.5 billion people on the planet. Say, even if you had 1 million in YouTube influencers, um, they've got 7 billion people to to draw on, you know, to get their attention, to teach, to enlighten, to, you know, whatever it is that they want to do, much less Instagram and everything else. And these platforms have democratized people's ability to get out there and to display their talent. So we can create derivative works, we can get inspired by other people. People can do something really clever with something that we've created that never occurred to us, and that's magic, and that creates value of some sort. And it's not just, I mean, people think about value as if it's only about money, and it's not just about money. There's so much value that you can create in the world.
Money is just the symbol for keeping track of the value, but it's not about money at all. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's all about being in relationship with other people. And the people who are the poorest are the ones who are not in relationship, and that's where you get the despair and deaths of despair, certainly in the United States, because you're disconnected, you're isolated, you're lonely, you're depressed, because you're not part of a network, a social fabric.
One of the key points there is, because we are focused on increasing positive peace in the world, because our theory of change is basically, if we can get more people to be marginally better to each other in a cyclical compounding way, that first of all, it'll take resources away from violence, but second of all, it's just a much more rewarding place to be in the world and much more fun. Yeah. Once you start looking at positive peace, one of the things you see is what you were just describing, and here's sort of just a quantitative approach to it. At any given moment in time, most of us are only interacting with a few people. Mm-hmm. And so at any given moment in time, most of us are not interacting with the other 7-point-something billion people on the planet. Have a little bit more positive engagement with a few more of those people. We would still have barely dented the blue ocean of design space there of all the people who haven't yet figured out any way to can serve each other. Mm-hmm. And this is where the technology part comes in. Have you ever been at a party or an event or something, and you find yourself standing in a corner because nobody's having the basic conversation with you about, hey, so, you know, what do you do for a living, or whatever the icebreaker question is, right? And I know that until you met me, you were often that person at a party.
Or I would bring a camera. It gave me something to do.
If you now think about a technology that alleviates that a little bit, you know, whenever you want to have a conversation with somebody and say, so, hey, what do you do? And you know, what's interesting about your work and your job and stuff, or whenever you want somebody to have a conversation like that with you, think about LinkedIn here for a moment. LinkedIn is a way for each of us to automatically have that kind of a cocktail chatter conversation about, hey, who are you? What do you do? Where do you work? You know, what do you care about? What are you interested in? It's a way to automate having those conversations so that my LinkedIn profile can go have those conversations with anybody who wants to meet that crazy guy from Stanford. And my LinkedIn profile can be having that conversation while I'm asleep, basically, you know? And in the same way, their LinkedIn profile can be having a conversation with me where I can go in later in the day and say, oh, so-and-so is connecting with me. And then I can go see, oh, look at that, they're good at that. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if there's a research collaboration there, and so on. Those of us who actually sort of practice deliberately, intentionally looking for who can I be good to, how can I be good to them, how much can I increase the positivity here. When we're just doing that on our own with just our brain and having to do it sort of custom day by day, it takes work, right?
Yeah.
But a bunch of this stuff can be automated. A bunch of this stuff can be automated. A bunch of these things are care decisions we can make once and then embed them into software. And then the software can go out and be good on our behalf.
Bring the Nelson bot on. Maybe at the end, effective peacemaking is effective code writing and code debugging. Yeah.
This is why we talk about layers of code and five basic. You know, I've got this presentation on a brief
the 5 codes. Yeah, religion, law, Writing, software. Let's see. I'm trying to think of all of them.
Testing your memory.
I
Starts
know
with DNA,
religious. Yeah,
and
DNA, then religious
then
code,
language. No,
language,
DNA, then
language.
language. Then you had religious code, and
Then
then
you
you
have
had
legal code,
legal code. Yeah,
and then you have software code.
exactly.
Right.
Religious code also functioned as legal code for most of its history. And then in the Enlightenment, you suddenly got people saying, what if we didn't make it so that only the high priests could play with the code? What if we made it, what if we democratized this function? And we got far better decision making as a result, as a large society, that what if anybody who can get a constituency behind them is allowed to tweak the code and test the code?
Agreed. And I think on that note, we're going to stop because we've hit our hour and 5 minutes.
I really want to bookmark. You learned some valuable lessons about de-risking life in venture capital. I'd like you to come back and apply those lessons to de-risking all of life. And then I'd like to build on that with, because you talked today about some of the challenges you've seen in the VC approach to life, or the VC approach to money, which we're going to generalize to life. But there's some good things there too. And we've looked at both the good things and the challenges, and then we've sort of taken it 2 stages further. And at some point, it'd be interesting to give people that overview of how to de-risk life in general and how to have much more success at many more things in life. There's some general principles there that come out of venture capital. Venture capital plus our work. Next time.